What is your reaction to this reporting now in multiple outlets that Mitch McConnell does not have the votes tonight to block the witnesses you, as House managers, have been seeking?
Well, it's very good news. I mean, obviously, if you're going to have a fair trial, you have to have the witnesses. Any 10-year-old knows that if you're going to have a trial, you have witnesses, you have documents. It was a heck of a nerve for Mitch McConnell and others to try to block witnesses because they knew that these witnesses would condemn the president. And the fact that now, with the Bolton revelations, McConnell says he doesn't have the votes is very good news. His attempted cover-up may be unraveling. If
he still doesn't get these votes, then as early as the end of this week, there could be a floor vote to begin a process of calling witnesses. There's been so much talk about John Bolton, but as a House manager, if that process goes there, who are the witnesses your side will be seeking?
Well, John Bolton certainly. What's his name? Dunleavy, Mick Mulvaney, rather, the president's chief of staff. Some of the other witnesses who we have heard had first-hand information. John Bolton certainly, and maybe now John Kelly.
John Kelly, you would want to call, given his remarks about Bolton's veracity?
Yes, that would seem to indicate that he has knowledge of what Bolton's testifying to.
Very interesting. Would you be sure that you get up or down votes on each of those individually, or how do you pursue that?
Well, hopefully we'll get a vote to permit all witnesses, and if not, we'll seek individual votes. It depends on how the Senate votes.
Have you discussed the idea of calling General Kelly with other managers or senators?
No, it just seems pretty obvious.
Your name, of course, came up on the Senate floor. Take a listen to Trump lawyer Jay Sekulow here in the trial.
I have been critical of Manager Nadler's executive privilege and other nonsense. Let's not start calling constitutional rights other nonsense, lumping them together. Of course, this is from a House of Representatives that actually believes the attorney-client privilege doesn't apply.
And in a similar vein, one of the Senate jurors you were arguing to, as you know, Senator Collins, said this, quote, "I was stunned by Congressman Nadler's approach. If we were in normal debate, we'd strike the words of a senator, quote, imputing another senator." She talked about how she wrote a note and she was glad to see the Chief Justice admonish both sides. I wanted to give you the chance to respond to all of the above.
Well, the fact is that what was the first one that what was the first
I can read
criticism?
it. Yeah, Mr. Sekulow said, quote, "I've been critical of Manager Nadler's executive privilege and, quote, other nonsense."
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, what I said was that there was certain nonsense about executive privilege, that executive privilege is a limited privilege. The Supreme Court decided in 1973 that executive privilege could not be used to shield criminal conduct, and anything else to be said about it was nonsense. And frankly, what the impeachment, what the president's people have been saying about all these things is nonsense. There is no right to shield evidence from a court. There's no right to shield evidence from the Senate. There is a limited right for the president to get candid information under executive privilege. But as the Nixon case of the Supreme Court said in 1974, that must surrender when there's an accusation of wrongdoing. And the fact is that if you agreed with what the president is claiming, with what his people are saying about executive privilege and about absolute immunity, then Congress has no right to get any information at all. This would deny all information to Congress, which in effect would leave the executive all powerful because Congress cannot act without information. And the president, and that's why we put this in Article 2 of the impeachment inquiry, the president has asserted the right. He said, "I will deny all subpoenas." And he has denied all subpoenas, all requests for information. Besides being self-serving, this is an attack on the ability of Congress to function. It's an assertion that the presidency ought to be a dictatorship.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.